Welcome back to 8 Spotlight, where we sit down with the founders redefining the next decade of AI, software, and innovation. I'm your host, Samantha from 8 Capital, and with a portfolio now crossing 200 plus companies, we've seen firsthand what separates the dreamers from the doers. Today's guest is one of the rarest types of founders in Silicon Valley, a solo YC founder who beat the odds and built a profitable, fast growing biotech focused AI company entirely on his own terms. His name is Jin Kim, the founder and CEO of Miracle. Say hi, Jin.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Samantha. Thanks for having me.
It's a YC backed platform transforming how biotech companies run clinical trials. Miracle is already powering studies across multiple therapeutics, landing deals with companies like Vistagen, Axial Therapeutics, Odyssey Therapeutics, and more. Also, in a rare twist that I certainly haven't seen before and I'm looking forward to making sense of, he also competed on the USA Olympic Archery Team before going to MIT. Casual. In this conversation, we're diving into the inner workings of biotech sales cycles, data integration, company building under shifting policy, and the mindset that powers founders who build companies the hard way and win. Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Amazing. I'm excited. You're one of, as previously mentioned, a rare solo YC founders, something YC generally discourages. Why did you choose to build this company alone?
That's a really good question. And so that's right. I went through the YC batch. There's not that many solo founders, but also at the same time, there were more solo founders than I had previously anticipated. And so if I go back to the founding story of Miracle and if I look back at to why I became a solo founder, right before going into YC, I was at grad school back at MIT, and I did do a couple of trials with a couple of classmates here and there. But for me, my North Star was wanting to build something that really makes an impact in healthcare. And I think part of it is just having been a former pre-med, having been on that pre-med and the becoming a physician track, it always had to be something that moves the needle for healthcare. And for me, as I talked to more and more people out in healthcare, it became very clear that there was a huge gap in the biopharmaceutical industry where the technology does not support, or rather, the technology is not integrated into the clinical workflows in a way that people will actually use it. And so when I set out to build a company around this, building at 3 years ago, building some sort of a tool that can help biotech teams automate some of the manual spreadsheet work that they were doing in clinical trials, I found myself at a very unique intersection where I have previous experience running enterprise sales. I've sold a 7, 8 figure contracts into pharmaceutical companies and large health systems. At the same time, I was also a product manager of a healthcare analytics team at my previous company called Inner Systems. And I also was very fortunate enough to have an engineering degree and a very technical background from MIT. So I think I was very fortunate to have that kind of three areas come together that really equipped me for success as a solo founder.
Incredible. What personal traits do you think enable you to operate successfully without a co founder?
That's a really good question. And I think one of the traits for me is a lot of my life, a lot of my outlook has been influenced by archery. And I know we'll get into it and we'll talk a lot more when we get into it. But archery is a sport that I've done growing up, and it's a sport where there's not a lot of physical aspects, but there's a lot of mental aspect, and it's always a battle against yourself. And so whether you shoot a perfect bullseye, the dead center of the target, the archery field is usually 70 meters away, and you're shooting at a target that, the yellow is right around 12 centimeters wide. And so it's a needle in a haystack. But for you to be able to shoot that arrow, whether it's out in your garage or your backyard or on a metal stage with the entire world watching, at the end of the day, it's the same arrow and it's just all in your head, really. And so if I really applied that into being a solo founder, whereas whether I was solo or if I had multiple people, the adversity, we would have gone through it the same way. And it's having that insane and intense focus on building what our users in the biotech field want is what really kept me going all through these years.
I'm so glad that you brought up tying archery with being a solo founder because
Well, I am.
we're going to get into it later. But before we do that, I have to ask, What are the hardest moments of being a solo founder? And what pushes you to keep going through those?
I think some of the hardest parts about being a solo founder, especially in the early days and especially during the batch. Being a solo founder, you are definitely in the minority. I forget what the exact numbers were, but I think there were right around 20, 30 of us in the solo founder group within my batch, which was almost 3 years ago now. The obvious one is teams that have even just team of two, they have 48 hours in a day. I have 24. And I can't just go out and magically buy more time. And so that's where I think having an intense time management skills was really necessary. But also at the same time, a lot of the YC founders during the batch and beyond, we always talk about not burning out and having a balance between the insane amount of work we do with all the things that goes on in life as well. Well, for me, I had to make up for that. And I think the very first year of Miracle, I didn't see that many friends. And all I did was work on Miracle. And that included evenings, that included Saturdays and Sundays. I was always at our office at a WeWork, no exceptions. So I think that's what it took for everything to really get going.
I actually met up with my cousin, who's also a founder, this past weekend. And she was talking about something very similar, which is that people don't necessarily always understand just how much work it takes to
Yeah.
get something going, to
Yeah.
build something and create your dreams.
I just had to do it.
Exactly. How does being a solo founder influence your decision making and prioritization as a founder?
I think if being a solo founder, I think thankfully I get to make decisions right then and there, right? I don't have to have a huge discussion with other co-founders or involve everyone. So I think for me, I was very fortunate to have a very short iterative feedback loop where anything that I hear from our customers and users, and I'm still a very close part of all of our customer meetings today. So being able to listen to feedback, and if there's anything that they tell us about the existing pain points that Miracle's solving today, or maybe we built a feature and it's not completely solving their pain points, then we get to entirely flip our product roadmap and transition our focus to making sure the critical pain points are solved. So I think being a solo founder really gives me the flexibility to bring that sense of urgency directly from the users to our product and engineering team so that we can quickly turn things around.
Yeah, that's a huge pro. That is definitely a huge one. And I've never thought about it that way before.
There's definitely cons of being a solo founder. There's a lot of pros as well.
Would you say that's the main one?
That's definitely one of the ones. And I think this other one is, I think, one of the big killers of startups, especially in the early days, people say is co-founder disagreements and conflicts. Fortunately, I don't have to go through that. And, I have to say that the solo founder group is very much growing community, unfortunately. There are more and more solo founders as teams go through these kind of splits and disagreements.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. You've built a healthy, growing company in a brutally difficult industry. What do you think people underestimated about you before you did this?
What they underestimated about me. Coming into this industry and having had healthcare enterprise sales experience over the years, I've always known that selling anything into healthcare is a long-term game. It's not like something you can just massively start spreading across healthcare. And especially for us, we're selling into biopharmaceutical teams that are running clinical research. And so a lot of the personas that we're targeting are MDs and PhDs who have a track record of running very successful research in the past. And they already have their set blueprint, set protocol, and set ways of doing things. And no one wants to be the first to try something new because I really think that if you've heard of the saying, you can't go wrong or you can't get fired for working with IBM, this is a mindset from 30, 40 years ago. Well, that still exists today. And the proxy for that is you can't go wrong with X, right? And that X being whatever the big player in this biopharmaceutical industry is. But I've always known that how clinical trials are run today is highly inefficient. And just hearing the raw numbers, it takes up to 10 years to bring a new drug to market, and it could cost up to 2, 3, I think now it's closer to $3 billion. That's a lot of money, that's a lot of time, and there's a lot of inefficiencies. And so having seen biotech teams and even larger pharmaceutical teams do this manually, especially when it comes to all the data, that you should let the data do its work, but people are doing things manually in Excel. I knew that, and I had that conviction that things will change and things can change. It's just a matter of time. And so, going back to your question, I think people in my early days did say, oh, that's not going to work, right? People are going to use that because people have done things the way that they've done for 20, 30 years. But I didn't want to take no for an answer because I was on a mission to really help improve healthcare. And I think part of it is making sure we not from the outside in, but really becoming one of the insiders and really understanding why things are done that way and why it has to have had done, right? Like, and really understanding that rationale and then trying to, instead of just saying, I think a lot of AI companies these days come in and say, oh, AI can automate all of this. I honestly think in terms of the healthcare space, that's the wrong kind of messaging. I think rather the focus should be, the pain point should be, right, laying out what are the pain points, why things are done today, how can we improve this 5% or 10%, and then gradually up to 15, 20, and then up to 80, 90, and even hopefully 100%, right? I think that's been the right way. But unfortunately, that takes a lot of time and also knowing how to navigate and align stakeholders across the entire industry.
For listeners new to Miracle, how do you describe what the platform does?
At a very high level, for someone who does not really understand the biopharmaceutical industry, there's a saying that biopharmaceutical and clinical trials, it's an industry that runs on Excel spreadsheets. There's multiple different databases that capture data for clinical trial, whether it be patient health data, their labs, or their visits and operational data. And there's no single way to bring all of the data into a single data warehouse and serve up analytics. That's where Excel is a tool that already comes free on everyone's Windows computer, so that's why people use it. What Miracle does is we let data do its work. We integrate with those data systems and provide a single real-time automated dashboard so that biotech teams don't have to spend hours every single week just to get visibility into their study. And as a result, we've not only helped free up 20, 30, 40% of time that used to be previously wasted on maintaining these kind of spreadsheet trackers. But as a result of having real-time data, finding things out as they occur, not next week when someone has time to put these trackers together, it's been so rewarding to hear that some of our biotech companies have finished clinical studies 3-4 months ahead of scheduled timelines. And with a couple of our customers nearing the FDA approval process, for me, it'll be a dream come true when I can confidently and successfully say that Miracle has played a role in helping bring new treatments to patients faster.
That's incredible, truly.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that you boast about is frictionless onboarding. What does that look like in biotech?
Typically in biotech, when companies work with vendors, I think the typical expectation is very expensive implementation and startup fee, along with weeks, if not months, of meetings after meetings, stakeholder alignment meetings. And what we've done here at Miracle differently, and I've seen that over the years, and our premise is to help you save time and optimize clinical trials, right, and boost that efficiency. And we really mean it. So as soon as we start working with a biotech company, once we're granted access and given the green light to set up the integrations, we have our dashboards up and running typically in about 2-3 days. And so we really want to provide a seamless onboarding process where, from the very start, you're not spending hours and days in meetings just for the sake of having meetings, but having those operational insights into exactly what's going on in your study fast.
Miracle has recently signed companies like Hemab, Vistagen. What patterns do you see across the biotech customers adopting your platform?
I think the biggest thing is all of our customers are super innovative and they have been not afraid to try out new tools, something like Miracle. And what all of them have in common, and actually what all the biotechs have in common, is they have so many spreadsheets, one after another, Excel, and there's so many spreadsheet related tools. It's a spreadsheet chaos. And for them, of course, that's the status quo. So, you can't go wrong with doing that. But it's the people who want to do right for the patients who are waiting for these drugs. And that's where, they have been willing to use something like Miracle so that they're not only eliminating all the spreadsheet chaos that they would have had to otherwise gone through, but it's really about how can they run faster, more efficient clinical trials so that they can bring the new medicine to patients faster.
What do you think has been the biggest product breakthrough for you so far?
The biggest product breakthrough from from our viewpoint, well, that's gonna be hard to pick just one. Actually, maybe I think I can pick one. The biggest product breakthrough has been that we've been a single dashboard solution for clinical trial management and really to increase visibility and transparency. But I think one of the biggest product breakthroughs that we've really just realized in the past couple of months through our recent growth has been now across couple dozen of studies. We're powering phases 1, 2, and 3 across CNS like Parkinson's, autism, hypertension, so cardio studies, rare diseases. We've began to identify a pattern of best practices that clinical biotech teams look at. Miracle has essentially become a prepackaged best practice metrics, right? These are the absolute must-have metrics for your clinical trials. And, I think that's really become a breakthrough for us because as soon as a biotech company starts working with us, it's no longer what metrics should we care about? Oh, these are the metrics that we cared about at my previous company. Or the director of ClinOps always having to come up with what metrics do we need to have our eyes on? No, it's Miracle already has those metrics. Miracle already has them prepackaged because of all the dozens of studies that we've already worked on. And that's really been a huge value add for our new biotech customers because they now know all the metrics and they can rely on Miracle to help really shed light on some of the new other metrics that they might not have previously known about.
That's really cool. So, walk us through the typical sales cycle when selling into biotech and pharma.
There is no typical sales cycle, I'll say.
Okay.
Every sale is different. The reason I say that is typically in a SaaS world, especially out here in Silicon Valley, we always think of a funnel. It's always go after the top of the funnel. Eventually things will trickle down and you're going to have deals. Part of that is actually a large part of that is true for healthcare as well. But the reason why I say every sales cycle is a little different is because a lot of healthcare, and especially for us selling into biotech teams, many folks are those MD, PhD personas where they already have a huge repertoire of what made them successful over the years. They have their own playbook, they have their own vendors, they have their own team that they usually take with them as they jump ship and go to new biotech companies. And penetrating that is really difficult, right? How can you get someone to do something differently when they've been doing that and it's made them successful the past 20, 30 years? And I think a huge success driver for us and the typical sales cycle for us has been word of mouth, referrals, and people taking Miracle onto their next companies and, continue to use Miracle on new studies. And for us, that has been something where from day one, we've always doubled down on the customer success, customer support, and making sure that all of our users' pain points are met. And that in turn has led to our top of top of funnel, right? Instead of all these marketing or LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter ads, it's really been doubling down our customer success. And that's really funneled the new companies that want to use us. And as a result, people who've already used us, or if it's a referral coming from a work colleague that they've worked with before, it's led to a very smooth sales cycle.
So, word of mouth plays heavily, so I imagine that now, a couple of years into this, it's a lot easier gaining these customers than it was when you first started.
Absolutely. It's a night and day difference.
What was your game plan for that first customer? How did you do that?
The first customer definitely takes me back on a journey. So 3 years ago, I had just started, this was when I was back at MIT for grad school. But prior to MIT grad school, I was working at a sales job selling software into pharmaceutical and health systems. So I had a lot of confidence that I knew how to tap into pharmaceutical companies and sell the software. But what I didn't realize was I didn't have the backing of the company that I worked at before that had decades of experience and history of working with these kind of clients. So essentially, it was just me. And I was asking people to take a bet on me. And a lot of what happened and to get the very first customer, and our very first customer was Axial Therapeutics on their phase 2 autism study. Until I landed there, it was talking to as many people as I can in the biotech industry and trying to learn. And actually, funny enough, the idea that I approached Axial Therapeutics is not the idea that we're currently building at Miracle. And that in itself led to a pivot. But essentially, the very first customer was just trying to talk to as many people in the industry as possible, trying to probe them for what are the pain points that are getting in the way of their drug development and even clinical trials today, and literally just asking them, hey, I have a technical background. What can I do to help? And happy to, tell you more about that pivot story at Axial as well.
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, so the pivot story was this was late 22, so right before ChatGPT came out, but they still had these kind of APIs available. And so my idea at the time was a lot of clinical trials, you need to analyze a ton of research papers and publications and somewhat use the information that's available to inform your current clinical trial, right? Seeing what research was already conducted in the past and how you should take that into consideration as you design and run future studies. It's a lot of words in these papers, and I thought it was a great use case for LLM. So when I first approached Axial, I wanted to see how I can help them use LLMs to analyze their clinical trial protocol, compare against all the different publications that's out there on the web, and provide guidance on how they should best redesign and think about optimizing their clinical trial. That never really stuck, and I think initially people at Axial were saying, "Yeah, Jin, this looks great. It's such a cool product." They would say that, but they didn't really use it. And so when one of the day when I felt that it was becoming a waste of time to really continue to work on this product, I pulled aside one of the VPs. His name was Gabriel Belfort. He basically said, "Jin, this tool is great and all, but my team, we're trying to figure out how many patients do we have in the study, and how are the recruitment vendors we're working with? What kind of ROI do they have? And what can we do to essentially recruit, enroll, and finish the study faster?" And upon hearing that, I took a look at what their team was doing, and it was Excel spreadsheets. They were logging into all kinds of systems to try to put a holistic picture of how their study was progressing. And it was all because not all actually none of the systems that they had really integrate and talk to each others. And so as a result, you would have to use Excel to log into these systems and then basically copy paste these numbers into a single spreadsheet tracker. And that's where I basically took the data extracts that they had and built a single real-time dashboard. And essentially, it not only freed up their time, but I was able to also use data science. And it wasn't even AI at this point. It was just basic data science to show the conversion rates, the efficacy rates, and what they might think about doing to help recruit faster and make sure that some of the budget that they were spending on recruitment vendors were actually bearing fruit in terms of yielding patients that they needed. So that was a crazy pivot story as well, because I had set out on building something that I thought that they needed. It sounded good on paper, and I'm sure investors would have loved it with AI and LLM all over. But it was really about listening to users, finding what their real pain points are. I always call it the biggest head on fire problem, and making sure that those needs are met first.
Yeah, incredible. So, when policy changes, how does Miracle adapt?
Yeah, so there's a lot of policy changes, obviously, right, with election last year. There's been a lot of changes at the top, right, with FDA, and it's definitely caused a number of different policy changes. And I think the biggest thing is it's also caused a lot of uncertainty for how drug development processes might be impacted, but also too how technology and even AI is going to be adopted within the industry. For how we've been doing things at Miracle, we've always been listening to our customers and looking to them for guidance. But I think one of the biggest things that's helped us stay afloat despite a lot of these uncertainties is from day one. We've been SOC 2, GDPR, HIPAA, and there's another FDA related one, 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. We've had all of those in place. And 3 years ago, when it was just me and when our team was very small, it did feel like overkill to have all of that. But having seen that from day one, we've had a very, very clean and we've had a really great way of staying compliant. And so now our customers have that peace of mind so that as we go through a lot of these uncertainties, they know that Miracle is already compliant. And so, I think really being able to give our customers a peace of mind through this kind of phase of uncertainty has been really great. I will say that we did go against the typical advice because out here in San Francisco with a lot of AI companies, I think SOC 2 tends to be something where it's, oh, you can just get it later when you really have meaningful traction, or, you can, worry about it later and just do it later. For me, that didn't really stick. And I've always known that data regulation and compliance is the number one thing that is important, especially, building in healthcare, anything that even remotely associates with, patients. I think that's something that we have to prioritize and act with a sense of urgency. So, that's where I did go against that kind of advice in Silicon Valley to just skip it for now and come back to it later. But we did double down on that. And I'm really glad we did that.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give other founders navigating sectors where policy can swing dramatically?
Especially for founders who are just starting out, if you're building for healthcare or any other similar industries or even finance, where all of these kind of compliance is needed, don't skip it. I would make sure to check all the boxes for compliance because as soon as you're about to have meaningful traction, you don't want to get stuck with, oh, now we're going to have to wait 3 to 6 months so that we can get all of the necessary policies and all of the compliance in place, right? So you don't want to lose any momentum from deals just because of this. And especially in times of uncertainty, really giving your customers a peace of mind that, your company was built around compliance, right? You can really say that if you start building around that from day one.
So, how do you personally stay calm and roll with the punches?
An interesting question. How do I stay calm and roll with the punches?
Yeah, I want to know.
I think for me, it really goes back to archery again, because archery, again, it's something that I've done, most of my life, and I've had the fortune of training at the Olympic Training Center. One of the biggest, most helpful exercise for me at the Olympic Training Center, it's not weightlifting, it's not shooting arrows. It was actually those days where our archery coaches took away all of our bows and arrows, forced us to stand on the archery field, looking at a target, and you're just standing there just with no bow and arrow. It's like, okay, what am I doing here? And they would have us imagine shooting, picture shooting, right? And pretend that we're shooting at the Olympic gold medal match or pretend that we're shooting at a, bizarre look. It's all in your head. So through that, I've really learned that mental focus and even just kind of pretending and just kind of simulating what it's like to go through that, it really helps a lot. And so for me, being able to battle through all these kind of challenges over the years, I think one is just mentally preparing myself for those kind of situations. And of course, there are stressful situations and there are high stakes sales meetings, but always being able to picture through not only the outcome, but picturing myself going through the process and how I want to feel has really helped me stay calm and take things, I like to say, one arrow at a time.
I like that. That's cute. One arrow at a
Yes.
time. Okay, that's actually the perfect segue because what I have up next is the archery segment.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so as previously mentioned, you did compete on the USA Olympic Archery Team, which is absolutely bonkers and incredible.
That's a lifetime. I hardly remember now.
Well, nevertheless, a lifetime ago, it happened, and I want to hear about it. What kind of training did that require mentally and physically?
So I talked about some of the mental aspects a little earlier, but I will say you definitely need a lot of physical strength. So for me, my bow setup, if you look at the Olympics, right, you see people. So I used to shoot Olympic style recurve. And so you would see not just the bow, but also a lot of the counterweights that are attached. So the bow setup itself could be anywhere between 5, 10 pounds. And, you're holding it out up in the air where you're shooting at a target 70 meters away. So even a half or even zero point 0.1 degree deviation, you could miss the target. In addition to that, the poundage of the bow that we were pulling back on, I had a very similar setup as the Olympic athletes, right? So I trained at the Olympic Training Center. So I would be easily pulling back 50, 55 pounds. During training, we would spend, every day we would shoot anywhere between 2 to 4, 500 arrows a day. And on the day of the competition, we would be shooting, typically 72 arrows for qualification, and then you go on to elimination rounds. But being able to pull back the arrow and have an insane focus to, make sure you're locked on that bullseye 70 meters away, that has to feel super easy, right? You can't be struggling to pull back the bow and, so to support that kind of stability, we definitely need to do weight training. So archery, from the outside, it looks like, oh, you just stand there and pull back a bow. Yes, that is, but you also need to do a lot of training to be able to not just pull back the arrow, the bow, but also make sure your hands are rock steady and locked on so that the arrow is pinpointed to the target. And you also have to be prepared to shoot that, especially when you make it onto medal matches. Cameras are in your face, the broadcaster is yelling your name. And I still remember there was a huge jumbotron that they put right next to the target on one of the medal stages that I competed at an international tournament. As soon as I pulled back my arrow, I made eye contact with myself on the jumbotron. So being able to go through any of that, right? It's really all in your head. That kind of training, I really enjoyed it. I miss those days that I got to spend at the Olympic Training Center.
How did you get into that?
Doing archery was really a freak accident. Growing up, I grew up in Southern California and I used to love all kinds of sport, basketball, tennis, swimming, water polo, soccer. And archery was something that I just had a very interesting opportunity to try out. There was the US Olympic archery coach was doing like a little community demonstration, and I went to go shoot a few couple arrows, and it was very interesting because all the other people who were there, their arrows were quite spread out, and I did notice. My arrows were interestingly very clustered together. And I still remember the coach coming up to me and saying, "Hey, where's your parents?" And I think that might have been my cue to give archery a try. And so that's how I got into it. But interestingly enough, it took me what 3, 4 years. I think 3, 4 years to make the national team. I also have a younger brother. His name's Kevin, and he used to tag along anytime that I go to the archery range. But typically after school, he used to sit there while I practice. And one of the days, my coach handed him a bow and said, "Hey, don't just sit there. You should try out archery and see how you like it." My brother made the national team in 6 months.
That's
uh,
incredible.
and so really throughout archery, we became essentially an archery family because my mom and my dad both, they didn't pick up a bow and arrow, but they've taken us to all kinds of archery tournaments and essentially became our archery coaches too. So, anytime I think about archery, I reflect on that and the good times that we've had.
Aw, it was a family affair.
Absolutely. We've gone to all over. We've been to, Alabama, Ohio, North Dakota. We've been all over in the States.
Okay, so then you should know. You have to tell me the secret. Like I really need to know. What does it really take to be great at archery?
What does it take to be great at archery? It's a bit cliche, but I want to say persistence, not giving up. Because anytime you do a sport, not just archery, but any kind of sport, there's ups and downs, right? There will be days where you shoot an arrow and you don't even know how you shot it, and it just lands in the bullseye. Then some days you try so hard and you've worked so hard. No matter how hard you try, the arrow doesn't go or your body doesn't move the way that you want it to. And I think, not giving up and just keeping things going and making sure that, trusting the process that you're going through, and kind of seeing far ahead, that's been the key. And that's where I've also shared earlier, I borrow a lot of what I've learned through archery and now work as a founder and CEO of Miracle is really having that laser focus on, why am I building Miracle? It's really so that we can use technology to help improve healthcare. And through Miracle, our goal has been to help biopharmaceutical companies run more efficient clinical trials so that we can bring treatments and medicine to patients faster.
It's really incredible.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
love the way that the discipline of archery has kind of followed you throughout your life into what you do now.
Archery has been my life and it's taught me a lot. So I look at archery as a teacher.
Incredible. So, do you think athletes make better founders in regulated industries because of this, or is it just like a happy accident?
I don't know about that. I did come across a few folks in the industry who did share that, athletes definitely have a tendency to be laser focused and locked in. And having experienced that, right, where having had that patience and intense amount of focus paid off, it definitely helps me understand that, I really need to be patient because it's paid off before. and it's going to pay off again.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Miracle has maintained strong revenue, long runway, and low burn. Because of this, do you see a need to fundraise, or is that something that you're not interested in?
Fundraising, I always think of it as how quickly, do we want this to spread across the industry? And, my answer is, again, my North Star, and I'm a broken record here now, is improving healthcare with technology. And my personal mission is to help as many biotech companies to speed up clinical trials. And so if we can get there with our current state, great. But if we need to raise outside funding so that we can bring on the right investors and operators and essentially people to help scale this even faster, I want to make sure that, we're doing what's best for all of society and all of healthcare.
Fast forward 3 years. What does Miracle become?
That's a very interesting question. And one thing that I'll share is a lot of the big pharma players today are locked in on AI, and there's a lot of big AI initiatives all across biopharmaceutical industry. And what they don't realize is they're spending months, if not over a year, just to bring a lot of the data silos together into a single data warehouse so that they can run AI. Because otherwise, if you run AI on a single data silo, you're not getting the full picture. But the big problem is they don't have the infrastructure and they don't have the integrations to support those kind of use cases. But Miracle, we're on that path where we can become that, if you will, Plaid, the Plaid system where you have connect all the kind of financial systems. Miracle, I see a great future where we can become that Plaid for clinical trials, or more broadly, Plaid for drug development, where it's a plug and play model, is bring all your data silos, all your clinical trial systems, use Miracle to integrate and have a data infrastructure that's ready to power your AI infra. And I think once we get there, we'll not only be working with biopharmaceutical companies on clinical trials, but it's really to help them get more insights of the data that they already have, and even support real world evidence studies and help them run even faster and more efficient clinical trials moving forward.
Okay, I have one last question for you. Are you ready? For founders listening, especially ones building in hard, regulated spaces, what's the single piece of advice you wish you had heard earlier?
It's gonna be hard, but it's also gonna be fun, and I think that's the advice that I I think, actually, if I look back, I think people did tell me that it is hard, but I think at the time I didn't kind of take that to heart. It is hard, but it is fun. So buckle up and definitely enjoy the ride. I think that's one of the most important pieces looking back.
Okay, Jen, thank you so much for joining us on 8 Spotlight.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Samantha.
Your journey from Olympic archery to MIT to solo YC founder to building one of the most respected data platforms in biotech is exactly the kind of story that we love highlighting. If you want to learn more about Jin or Miracle, check out his LinkedIn and head to miracleml.com. I'm Samantha, and this has been 8 Spotlight. See you in the next episode.